At Training Industry, it's our business to know what makes a great training organization. Our annual top training companies lists are developed based on extensive research and analysis of training providers operating around the world. We examine the capabilities and expertise of hundreds of learning organizations with the mission of creating a more informed learning marketplace. With categories focused on segments in learning services, leadership, learning tech, and more, our top training companies lists are designed to help you find the right training partner. To view our entire suite of top training companies list, click the link in the show notes for this episode.
Welcome to the Business of Learning, the Learning Leaders podcast from Training Industry.
Hi, and welcome back to the Business of Learning. I'm Michelle Eggleston-Schwartz, Editor-in-Chief here at Training Industry.
And I'm Sarah Gallo, Senior Editor. Today, we're excited to discuss a topic that is essential in positioning training professionals and the entire training function as strategic business drivers: building business acumen. Business acumen has emerged as a key skill for learning leaders looking to gain a seat at the table and to gain buy-in and support for their programs. And although most of us aren't born with business acumen, the good news is that, like any skill, it can be learned. So today, we're excited to sit down with Dr. Keating, author of The Trusted Learning Advisor and Chief Learning and Development Officer at BDO Canada, to learn more about how learning leaders can build business acumen and become trusted partners in their organizations. So with that, Keith, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Thank you. And excited to be guest number 75.
Yes, welcome, Keith. I'm super excited for this conversation today. To get things started, can you share your own definition for business acumen and kind of touch on why business acumen is important for learning leaders today?
So by saying it's my own, that means that I did a little research beforehand to make sure my terminology was accurate, but I will use it in my own words. The business acumen is having that blend of knowledge, skills, and experiences that empowers you to understand the complexity of the business environment. It helps you make informed business decisions, and ultimately it drives business outcomes and successful outcomes. It's not just about having that business savviness, but it's more about having a deep grasp of those little nuances that influence organizational success. For learning leaders, particularly, strong business acumen is absolutely essential because it ensures that our learning priorities are directly aligned with the business goals and challenges. And ultimately, by us deeply understanding the business, we can craft our initiatives and our solutions that resonate with stakeholders and talent, ultimately with the goal of enhancing performance.
Now that we've touched on the what and kind of dug a little bit into the why here, can you share some tips or actionable best practices on how learning leaders can actually begin to build business acumen?
I think it starts with one of the most important words for us to continuously come back to, and that's value. The goal of L&D ultimately is the same goal that our stakeholders share, and that's to create value. So the most important thing you can do when you're trying to build that business acumen is understanding how your organization and your stakeholders seek to create value. And I think what's important here is a lot of the work that we do, or most of the work that we do, is contextualized to our organization. So it's important to understand what that value proposition is for both your organization and your stakeholders. So a couple of tactical things that you can do. One, understand the business model. How does your business actually operate? What are the different revenue streams? Who are the core customers that you're supporting? It sounds pretty basic, but a lot of times people, particularly in L&D, may not actually have this understanding of these two questions: revenue streams and our core customers. So one, understand your business model. Two, engage with the business. So regularly, you should be interacting with key stakeholders and business leaders across all of the various departments in the organization, not just one, not just two, but I look at us as the nucleus. I look at us as the center of our organizations and our companies, because we are one of the few businesses, we are one of the few units, organizations, whatever the word you want to use, in our companies that can look holistically across the entire organization. And we can be those connectors. So engage with the business. Now, not just your key stakeholders or your business leaders. You should also be talking with frontline workers. The frontline workers, those are the doers. Those are the people that actually get stuff done. What happens is the higher you go up in the organization, the further away they are from actually what's being done. And the people that are getting the work done, those are ultimately the ones that have some of the richest information. So talk to these people. They can provide extremely great insights into current challenges, different strategic priorities. So again, 1, understand the business model. 2, engage with the business. 3, speak their language. Don't just speak our language. One of the mistakes that L&D often makes is we use our own vocabulary and acronyms, LMS, LXP, MOOC. No one outside of us knows really what those are or cares about those acronyms. So one of the most important things we can do is learn their language. So look at the mission, vision, value statements. Ask for the last, 5 or 10 PowerPoint decks that your business partners have created. Ask for their strategies. Ask for acronym guides, definition guides. These are a great way for you to learn their vocabulary and start to speak their language. It's really important to remember to kind of switch off that L&D speak and speak in their tone. It helps them see you as a business partner. And then I would say for the last one, stay informed of industry trends. So everything I've talked about so far is looking internal at your organization. To build business acumen, you can also look external. So training industry, great resource. McKinsey Global Institute, World Economic Forum, Google Scholar, Gen AI, all of these different tools will help you get insight into different aspects about your industry and different economic trends that could impact your industry. And being informed helps you anticipate these changes and adapt your strategy accordingly. So quick recap: understand the business model, engage with the business, speak their language, and stay informed of industry trends by using external resources, World Economic Forum, McKinsey Global Institute, training industry. I could go on and on, but I'll stop there.
Love that. Those are some great tips that you touched on there. And I love what you had mentioned earlier around L&D is really the nucleus of the organization, and they're the connectors, and they can create that alignment and such good insights there. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your own experience with building business acumen and becoming a trusted business partner.
Luckily, very early in my career, one of my first jobs was as a consultant. And that helped me build the foundation for the concept of the book, The Trusted Learner and Advisor. It's stayed with me throughout my career, this idea of I want to be a strategic business partner. I want to be a consultant. I want to be an advisor. And it taught me very early on that building business acumen and building relationships is the most important activity that you can do. It's the most important thing you can do. So if there's anything you take away from this podcast today, it's you need to develop your business acumen and you need to develop the relationships in the business. And specifically, on this concept of being a trusted advisor, being a trusted learner and advisor, you don't ever arrive and you don't ever finish. It's a skill and it's a mindset that we have to constantly be striving to achieve. So when I'm in a new situation, like I am right now at BDO, where I've only been here for the last 4 months, my goal right now is just to listen and learn. That's it. What's interesting is I have a lot of stakeholders who are coming to me and say, hey, what's your strategy? What are we doing? My response is, right now I'm just listening. Because if I came in today and I laid out a strategy, that's a strategy based off of my previous experience in other organizations. It needs to be contextualized for my current organization. So I just need to listen. I need to understand the language of BDO. And that includes sometimes I have to take some orders at the beginning to build up that credibility and trust. So I'm just repeating that the business acumen and relationships is important. I learned that very early on. And the last piece I would share is credibility and trust. Those were important skills for me to develop, because when you demonstrate a clear understanding of the business and the way they operate or their metrics or the industry dynamics, all of these pieces, you earn credibility among your peers and your leaders. And credibility is the cornerstone of trust. And that is absolutely essential for any type of advisor role. And you need that to build that business acumen. So if your stakeholders trust that you grasp those nuances of the business, they're really more likely to rely on you for your recommendations that involve you earlier in your strategic discussions.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing a little more about your own experience with business acumen. And it sounds like that started pretty early on for you, which probably set you up for success throughout your career. I do want to switch gears for a minute to touch on kind of what you mentioned before, building those key relationships with stakeholders. Which specific skills do learning and development leaders need to really work effectively with stakeholders, and how can they develop them?
We need a lot of skills, and it can feel overwhelming, but ultimately our goal is to be trusted learning advisors, and to be on that journey means that you have the skills that your stakeholders need. So I could list off 20 or 30. I'm going to pick probably the top 5. The first is communication skills. That is, again, the foundation of all relationships, being able to communicate. So to practice that, we should be regularly engaging in activities that require us to present ideas. So if you're newer in your career, this might be an area that you haven't developed as such. So what you can do is, in team meetings, offer to run a team meeting, offer to facilitate a team meeting, or think about conferences, attending conferences and volunteering to speak at conferences like training industry. And doing so helps you to create the skill of being concise in sharing your message. And so communication, and then the sub skill of that is your conciseness and your ability to communicate. And one thing you can do along the way as you're building that is you can seek feedback. Feedback is ultimately a gift. And there's 2 ways you can give feedback or you can receive feedback. And you can ask for feedback. So you should be asking for feedback. Seek constructive feedback from your peers and your mentors on your communication style, and then try to adapt it based on their insights. So communication skills is number 1. Part of that, and the subset I said was being concise. The second subset of that is listening. As a trusted advisor, you should be doing 70% listening, 20% asking more questions to help uncover more information, and then probably 10% problem solving or responding to what you're hearing. But 70% is about listening. So you should be practicing active listening exercises. Think about mindfulness. Mindfulness is a great way to practice being present in the moment and staying focused during conversations, because it's so easy for us when we hear something and we want to respond to it, and we just focus on, okay, I'm going to wait till they take a break and then I'm going to respond, and we miss everything else that they're sharing with us. So one tip that I like to do is I always keep pen and paper handy, and I'll write down my quick note that I want to talk about. And that way I can get back to focusing on the conversation ahead. So mindfulness is a great tool for listening. And then even role playing. You can role play with individuals on your team, and then practice out scenarios where attentive listening or responding to different diverse viewpoints could come into play. And then I would say empathy is a really important skill for us as we're building business acumen, building our advisor skills, because we need to have empathy for our stakeholders, for our learners. Our learners are the ones that are having these challenges. Our stakeholders are often under pressure to maybe solve those challenges. Ultimately, Our goal as trusted advisors is to make our stakeholder the hero of their own story, to make our stakeholder the hero of their own story. And so to do that, we often play a supporting role instead of a leading role. Empathy is a great skill to have to be able to be successful in supporting your stakeholders. And then two other ones, influence. A lot of what we do in our role is required by influence because we don't often have a lot of authority. We don't often have a lot of power, but we can get our power back when we're in those order-taking roles through the power of influence. Role play, practice, create scenario-based activities that give you and your team the ability to practice responding to difficult situations. It doesn't matter what role you are, what your title is. I've been every role from a trainer, through a designer, through a performance consultant, through CLO, and every single role, including being a CLO, I am faced with difficult conversations with stakeholders. And I often have to influence them. Tactic that I always go back to is I role play. Role play. I want to practice helping influence ideas and outcomes, but I don't want my conversation with my stakeholder to be the first time that that's happening. The best way to get comfortable and familiar with that is to role play. So you want to practice influence and then problem solving. Ultimately, what we're doing at the end of the day is we are problem solvers. We're just happen to use L&D as our medium, as our vehicle for solutioning. But problem solving is ultimately what we exist for. So it's our job to build the biggest toolkit possible as trusted learning advisors. And part of that is having an awareness of the different problem solving tools that exist. So if you want one takeaway, design thinking should be a problem solving tool in your toolkit. Agile, PDCA, those are some other methodologies. So quick recap. 1, communication skills, listening, empathy, influence, and ultimately problem solving.
So many great skills there. I especially love the one about influence, as I know a lot of our listeners may not yet have that seat at the table. So that definitely is huge for them. We'll be right back after a brief message from our sponsor.
The Certified Professional in Training Management Credential, or CPTM, was designed to convey the essential competencies you need to manage a training organization. When you become a CPTM, you gain access to alumni resources like monthly peer roundtables and a full registration to the Training Industry Conference and Expo. If you start today, you can earn the CPTM credential in as little as 2 months. To learn more, visit cptm.trainingindustry.com.
We know that gaining a seat at the table isn't easy, especially for learning leaders. We publish so much content on this topic alone here at Training Industry because it's such a hot topic and it's extremely difficult to achieve. But the good news is that we really are seeing more businesses starting to view L&D as a strategic business function. So for our listeners who already do have a seat at the table, how can they make the most of that seat and drive impact in their organization?
I am envious of who those people are because they are the minority, not the majority. But I think this message holds true for those that are still striving to get there. You know, if a group has a seat at the table, they should give themselves that pat on the back. It took me about 18 years before I was in an organization where we were allowed in the room. But if you're already there, here's some things to consider. 1, if you've got their ear, you should be advocating for a learning culture. The fact that you're in the room means that there is some appetite there to strengthen one. A lot of people will make statements like, we don't have a learning culture. But even the absence of a learning culture is still technically a learning culture, just a really bad one. You should be championing for the development of a learning culture that encourages continuous improvement, innovation, knowledge sharing. And this can be through promoting policies that support ongoing education, tuition reimbursements, tuition assistance, recognizing and rewarding these type of learning achievements and embedding learning opportunities into everyday work processes, and ultimately striving to achieve equitable access to learning opportunities. I've both experienced this and also I've seen it in other organizations where they'll make statements like, yes, we have learning culture, we have leadership programs. And then you double click on that and you say, well, who has access to that? Oh, 3 to 5% of the company. That's not equitable. So if you've got that seat at the table, advocate for a stronger learning culture. Our success truly hinges on the existence of a learning culture. If we do not have a strong learning culture, we cannot ultimately be successful. So that's number one. Number two, make sure that you continue, if you're not already doing this, aligning L&D with ultimate business goals. You want to ensure that all your L&D initiatives are tightly aligned with the organization's strategic objectives. And this means understanding not just those immediate training needs that we get asked to do, but how those initiatives support long-term business goals. We tend to look at today, tomorrow, maybe the quarter, and not look at what does this look like? How does this play a role 6 months, 12 months, 18 months down the line? So we have to balance a lot in our role. And part of that balancing act is balancing how do we respond to what's needed today, but also plan for what's needed in the future. So you want to regularly communicate also on how L&D contributes to achieving these objectives. What I mean by that is I don't think we do a good enough job of celebrating our wins and our successes. We tend to keep that to ourselves. We'll celebrate that among our teams. Maybe we'll send out an email and whatnot. Share that with your key stakeholders. If you're in the room, share that with those in the room. I try to do this on a quarterly basis. I want to share out our quarterly wins so that there's this constant cycle of successes that we're having in the organization. So the first point is continue to advocate for a learning culture. Second is make sure L&D is aligned with your business goals. And the third is continue fostering strong stakeholder relationships. Relationships. We've got to continuously cultivate and maintain these relationships across the business. And this means that we need to have regular updates and discussions about progress, about the outcomes, about what's working well and what's not working well. I think, tend to shy away from that part of the conversation, but that's one of the things that I asked my stakeholder when we meet quarterly is, what can we be doing better? What didn't work the last quarter? What should we do differently? The goal ultimately is to keep that line of communication open, to be gathering feedback and adjust your programs along the way. And I'll just repeat one last time. Communicate your successes, just in your team, but also with your stakeholder, also in the executive room, also in LinkedIn. Write out industry articles, publish it, but continue making sure that your business knows of these successes.
Love that. Those are such great tips. Getting that seat and keeping that seat at the table is so challenging. So thank you for breaking all that down. So we've covered a lot of ground here today, and I've been actively taking notes to everything you've been saying here. But before we wrap up, what's one step our listeners can take after today's episode to begin building business acumen?
Besides reading Trusted Learning Advisor, a practical and immediate step that you can start to take today, conduct qualitative interviews. If that sounds too fancy, conduct empathy research. If that still is not resonating, just go out and talk to people and understand their perspective, understand their situation. Learn about your stakeholders and your learners directly. So if you want to break that down to something actionable, here's how to approach it. 1, identify a leader in your organization, maybe somebody that you don't already have a relationship with. Pick a leader that has a strategic role of some sort and maybe is known for a strong business acumen. Ideally, somebody in a different department, it could be finance, it could be strategy, it could be operations. Set up an interview with them. Reach out to them and request, maybe a 30-minute informational interview. Explain that you're looking to just build your relationship. You're looking to just build some business acumen. You want to understand their experience with learning and development, their challenges, and you'd appreciate their insights. And then 3, before you show up to that meeting, prepare thoughtful questions. So prepare lists that can help you understand the business better. So some questions could be, what do you see as the biggest challenge your business is currently facing? Or how do departmental strategies align with overall business goals? Or can you share examples of how understanding business metrics has influenced your decision making? Use ChatGPT. That's what I did. Come up with some questions to ask your stakeholder that are engaging, but help you understand their business better. Conduct the interview. Make sure you're focused, you're listening, you're taking notes. If you can, record it to help you run a transcript afterwards. Reflect after and apply the learnings. So you can share that feedback with your other L&D practitioners. You could write up a summary of what you learned, are going to take away, how you're going to apply it, and share that back to your stakeholder. That lets them really see that you understood, listened to them, and you're looking to apply what you've learned. And then I would rinse and repeat that. So right now, what I'm doing, because I'm new, is I am conducting qualitative research with all of the senior leadership team across BDO. Then I'm also meeting with frontline workers. I learned so much richness from those frontline workers. You don't have to be a leader in your organization to have these conversations. These can be informal conversations. But the point is you just want to be out there in the business, building relationships. This helps you not only build business acumen, but it also positions you as a proactive and strategic thinker in your organization. And really what it does, it increases your visibility. And we need to stay visible because we're so often in the shadows and as an afterthought. I want us to continue to evolve to being a forethought. And one of the ways we can do that is by having these relationships and conversations.
I completely agree. That kind of information gathering and reflection and building those relationships is such a foundational, great place to start. So I love that we ended today's conversation there. So with that, thank you for speaking with us on the podcast today, Keith. And we're looking forward to your keynote, Evolve or Else, the path to becoming trusted learning advisors at this year's Training Industry Conference and Expo in Raleigh, North Carolina this June. How can our listeners get in touch with you if they'd like to reach out after today's episode?
LinkedIn is the best way.
For more resources on building business acumen and similar topics, visit the show notes for this episode at trainingindustry.com/trainingindustrypodcast.
And if you enjoyed this episode, let us know, rate and review us wherever you listen to your podcasts. Until next time.
If you have feedback about this episode or would like to suggest a topic for a future program, email us at info@trainingindustry.com or use the Contact Us page at trainingindustry.com. Thanks for listening to the Training Industry Podcast.